I'm Wolfram Ruf. I was a postdoctoral fellow with Tom Edgington starting in 1988 at the Scripps Research Institute. And I share a long history of working with Tom and really remember him as a mentor and good friend throughout my career. He was through and through a Californian, a fourth generation California, who grew up in Los Angeles. Through hard work, he made it into medical school at Stanford University. And then he moved on to Philadelphia and came back to Los Angeles. And he spent some time in the Atomic Bomb Casualty Commission in Japan, studying the aftermath of the atomic bomb victims. Tom then came back to Los Angeles at UCLA. He joined the Department of Pathology. He was a junior faculty there, director of clinical pathology. But then in 1965, he decided to give up this position, his NIH grants, and moved to Scripps to join the laboratory of Frank Dixon as a postdoctoral fellow. And this was the start that he dedicated his career to basic research. Tom was a remarkable individual with a keen interest in technology, and he always wanted to be at the forefront of basic research. He essentially got fascinated with the field of thrombosis and hemostasis very early on, studying hepatitis, and the observation that in chronic hepatitis there is massive fibrin deposition. He had an extremely talented group of initial postdocs and junior faculty surrounding him at that time in the early 70s. It was Ed Blau, Linda Curtis, Frank Cesari, who really formed that initial group who drove these ideas forward that thrombosis is closely linked to immunopathology. All of these early trainees of Tom went on to become faculty member at Scripps, and many, many more followed their footsteps. And overall, Tom trained more than 70 postdoctoral fellows who all went on to be successful scientists in leading positions around the world. So Tom's thirst for science rapidly developed into an important impact he had on the research environment in Scripps. And he balanced what was back then a stronghold of Scripps in complement research with building a foundation for a very strong vascular biology department. Not only the trainees in his lab, but also surrounding faculty joined forces with Tom to bring Scripps to a very top level vascular biology stronghold in the United States and the entire world. Many of them you still know from our field: Mark Ginsberg, John Griffin, David Loscutoff. They were all associated in this bigger enterprise that Tom drove forward while at Scripps. He stayed there for more than 55 years. And one of his major successes and breakthroughs was that he back then was Jim Morrissey, was one of the labs who cloned the cDNA for tissue factor. This built on a long tradition that came out of his early work in immune-mediated activation of coagulant responses. He developed this strong interest in the coagulation system, recruiting important people, players like Darrell Fair. But then after the cloning, this was an area that really exploded and that he dominated with his group. Many of us, Nigel Mackman, myself, joined Tom at around that time. And it was really a great experience to have him driving this area, but not only towards bigger science, but also to develop interests in technology and driving this in biotechnology and industrial applications. He was connected very broadly throughout the field, but he also drove forward his ideas and created, at that time, Corvus, one of the companies that developed some innovative anticoagulants. And many of us benefited from these multiple connections that Tom developed throughout the world. Tom was a great mentor. He was always critical and supportive. He helped us develop ideas, and he pushed everybody to the forefront of research. He was demanding. The lab was open 24 hours and around the clock. In weekends, he showed up every Saturday, and that was the time when you had the chance to discuss with him. He helped us in our careers tremendously, but he was really also instrumental as a person who returned critical advice when it was needed most. He allowed us to move the field forward with him and then also move on in our own endeavors. He had certainly made the biggest impact by providing the training and the guidance to many, many investigators that dominate still today many areas of thrombosis and hemostasis research. More importantly, in retrospect, he was the one who also emphasized always that thrombosis and hemostasis is not an isolated field, but a field that extends to vascular biology and in particular immunology. And then understanding these fundamental connections is one of the most important aspects to drive the field forward. So Tom liked to live well. He was liked around the world, and he traveled a lot with his wife, Joanne. They stayed fond to travel to Japan, to Europe, to France, his favorite spots, and he was a frequent visitor to many of those centers. It is the impact that he left by his trainees and the research that he initiated in this field that radiated to other fields that made him such a special individual and a dear mentor and friend.